Last month, Chinese billionaire MILESGUO was arrested in New York for $1 billion in fraud. You need to be paying attention to this case because it teaches us a lot about what the government can do to business owners. This channel is not sponsored. My only goal here is to bring you the truth. What I've uncovered in the last 2 weeks is shocking to me. Let me start with the main issue. MILESGUO is being held in prison in New York without bail. He was arrested on March 15th. In 2 days, on Tuesday, MILESGUO is scheduled to go in front of the judge. And this judge is going to decide whether to release him on bail or keep him in prison. Now, the prosecutors are requesting that he be held in prison and not let out. This caught my attention because this is very strange. This is happening in New York. Now, I don't know if you are paying attention to what is going on in New York, but they are letting everyone out on bail. They're letting violent criminals out on bail. So why is MILESGUO being held in prison? He's being charged with an accounting crime. So the prosecutors usually stick an ankle monitor on them and send them home to prepare for trial. So then I started looking into this case more. MILESGUO is from China. He made his fortune as a business developer. Things started to go bad for MILESGUO when he started standing up against Chinese President Xi Jinping. Chinese authorities were going to arrest MILESGUO under allegations of bribery, kidnapping, money laundering, fraud, and rape. Now, if you know anything about the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, it is likely that all these charges are made up. The way the CCP deals with people who speak out is the CCP makes up false charges against them, throws them in jail, and you never hear from them again. MILESGUO fled the country in 2014. He has been living in the United States in exile for the last 9 years. He has been labeled as a right-wing conservative because he knows Steve Bannon and has funded several conservative causes. But if you look at MILESGUO's social media, he doesn't talk about right-wing conservative topics. His issue has always been corruption in China. That brings us to the current case for $1 billion in fraud. The fraud case itself is very strange. Here's the typical life cycle of a fraud case. There is some deception of a business person against investors. A good example of this is the FTX fraud case. FTX recently declared bankruptcy. Millions of people have lost their money. Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested for fraud. MILESGUO's case does not follow the same pattern. MILESGUO's businesses were not failing. The only reason the businesses were shut down is because the SEC came in and froze all of his assets. The SEC shut the businesses down. Second, there are no angry investors. I could not find any. I posted a thread on Twitter about MILESGUO's case. I received a flood of messages from investors, but these investors were not angry with MILESGUO. They were telling me that MILESGUO was innocent. This is very strange behavior by investors in a fraud case. Compare this to FTX. There are so many angry FTX investors. So I kept looking, and I did find 4 investors, but they were also very strange. For the first one, there is a video of one investor who filed a complaint with the SEC and FBI against MILESGUO. In the video, this investor gives a speech where he takes back his complaint and confesses that he was forced to make a false report by the Chinese Communist Party. So this investor is now in support of MILESGUO. For the other 3, I found 3 investors that filed a civil lawsuit against MILESGUO in Arizona. These 3 people have a total investment of $160,000. In the lawsuit, they are claiming MILESGUO committed fraud by making false statements, and they want their money back. Their general argument is that they gave their money to Miles, the SEC froze the assets, so Miles did not fulfill his promises. There's a couple of strange things about this lawsuit. There's only 3 investors. Out of $487 million of investment, only $160,000 are complaining. That only 0.03% of all investors, that is incredible. This Arizona lawsuit gives more details on the timeline of events. SEC started stepping in and freezing bank accounts as early as August 2020. By the end of 2020, MILESGUO was already telling investors of his deal with the SEC to refund the investors their money. So these investors filed this lawsuit on June 21st, 2021, already knowing that they were going to get their money back. They already knew that the SEC had their money, not Miles. It's very strange that they would even file this lawsuit. It's going to cost them more money in legal fees than they're going to get back from their investment, which they were already getting back without the lawsuit. It makes no sense that someone would file this lawsuit. Is it possible that these three investors are being forced to file this lawsuit by the Chinese Communist Party, just like the other investor who already confessed? It seems like this is a fraud case without any victims. The strange thing about comparing the MILESGUO case against FTX is that Sam Bankman-Fried is out on bail. It is hard to find the video of the investor admitting he was forced by the Chinese Communist Party. That video is being censored in Google search results. So if you go to Google, witness forced to testify by CCP against MILESGUO, nothing comes up. But if you type the same thing into the search engine DuckDuckGo, the video was the third link that showed up for me. What possible reason could Google have for hiding this person's testimony? What exactly is the government accusing MILESGUO of doing? It starts with a company MILESGUO started called GTV Media Group, which was proposed as a social media website. He started the business and opened it up to investors and raised $487 million in private placement. Well, the SEC came in, they seized all his assets. This was announced in a press release by the SEC in 2021, 2 years ago. The press release was titled, "Companies to Pay More Than $539 million in Settlement for Distribution to Investors." So the majority of the $1 billion in fraud that is currently being alleged today is from this one situation from 2 years ago. In the press release, there is no mention that there was any fraud involved. Here's the main statement from the release. There is no allegation of fraud or deception. It sounds like there is disagreement whether MILESGUO did anything wrong in the first place, but he came to an agreement with the SEC to just give the investors their money back. This happened 2 years ago. So the situation was resolved and agreed to with the SEC 2 years ago, and now they are changing their story. Let us compare this to the press release from the SEC 2 weeks ago. The story do not match up. Now, the SEC is claiming that the incident from 2 years ago was actually fraud. What is the fraud they are alleging? Here's what they say. They are accusing him of making false statements. They are also accusing Miles of misusing investor money and failing to register the securities with the SEC. But all these allegations are based on the supposed false statements made by MILESGUO. What is the false statement they are accusing him of making? They are saying that he promised outsized returns. But the only reason he was unable to make those returns was because the SEC shut his business down. What is the specific number that the SEC has determined is too great of a return on investment? They give a specific example of one of MILESGUO's false statements. He made a video on social media in 2020 where he proposed that the value of GTV was $2 billion US. They then provide the explanation that this statement could not have been true because GTV was a new business that generated no revenue. I find the government's statement in the indictment ridiculous on its face. Anyone in business knows that technology startups achieve high valuations all the time, even with no revenue. In addition, MILESGUO had done his due diligence. MILESGUO raised $487 million. Let us assume he's going to build his company over 10 years and then sell it for $2 billion. Now, to achieve that result, he would have to grow his business 15% each year. That's not unheard of for a technology startup. So what the SEC is saying in this press release is that if an American company has a business plan where they are predicting they are going to grow 15% a year, the SEC is going to step in and shut your business down because you are being too aggressive. I am shocked that the SEC has the legal authority to do this. It all comes back to whether this is a false statement by MILESGUO. Unfortunately, we will never know because the SEC shut the business down. What are the other charges? If we look at the DOJ press release, there are 12 different charges. Charge 2, wire fraud, and charge 3, securities fraud, are the two related to the private placement that I've already discussed. The other ones relate to MILESGUO's other businesses, including exclusive membership clubs called G Clubs and a cryptocurrency called the H coin. So when you look through the charges for all his online businesses, they basically all come down to the allegation that MILESGUO was making false statements. But in every case, the SEC comes in and freezes the assets before the business could do anything. The SEC caused the businesses to fail, not MILESGUO. So is this just me, or does all of this seem very strange? The two SEC press releases do not even agree with each other. First there was no fraud, now there is fraud, but it gets worse. I found this next part shocking. In the new press release from the SEC in 2023, they go on to say, so here they are referencing their 2021 press release. Then they go on, the SEC is distributing the funds collected to harmed investors. The SEC still has not distributed the funds yet? That was 2 years ago. Why does the SEC still have everyone's money frozen? Why are they still holding any of it 2 years later? I did not even know this was possible in the United States. And now they are holding the CEO in prison and will not let him out on bail. I do not see how the SEC wins this case. If that is true, they are just abusing this man. The reason I am making this video is I am sick and tired of the government attacking business owners in this country. I'm sick of it. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave. I, for one, will not stay silent while the Chinese Communist Party hijacks our Justice Department to attack their #1 enemy. I hope they let him out on bail for prosecutorial misconduct and malicious prosecution.